All right, hey, good morning or afternoon, West Civ students, and welcome back to the 3083 Evelyn Street Lecture Hall. I'm your host, Mr. Stephen Hagen. We're going to go through World War I today very quickly. So, a couple things. Number one, make sure that you watch the crash course history video on World War I, and then tackle more of your essay portion in the 2020 spring final review. I would look to have paragraphs 1 through at least 5 or 6 done by the end of the day on Thursday, so that on Monday you can kind of wrap up with paragraphs 6 and 7 and then have that essay completely done with and behind you. So if you haven't started that yet, you really need to buckle down and start on that, okay? So just to kind of set the scene here, I'm a little ahead of myself. The World War I starts in a large response to this idea of nationalism. Germany and France are very much at ends with competition, competing against each other for colonies around the world, and it's really kind of risen to a boiling point. So that's a big key there. We have the rise of militarism, which is this idea of the glorification of the military. That's a big part of why World War I started. People just didn't count the costs in terms of actual lives lost in a lot of these conflicts. They tended to see it as kind of like a glorious thing to die in battle. And then all of a sudden millions and millions of people die in battle, and it's not so glorious. Some of the alliances were France and Russia are the main characters here. Russia backing Serbia, and then Britain. So those three are the main allies. The Triple Alliance, or known as the Central Powers, are Italy, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Germany. So those are the core. I don't know why they call it the Triple Alliance when there's more than the three. Well, probably because Italy switches sides halfway through the war, then it becomes those three. They also do the same thing in World War II. Okay, so let's get into kind of how this breaks down. We can get to those characters later. This is just a map, shows you here. Central Powers, centrally located. Easy to remember, right? The Central Powers are in the center, right? The Allies are in green. You have France, Great Britain, and Russia. They're the ones who are kind of crunching in on Germany and the Ottoman Empire, which is kind of like the Austria-Hungary area here. Or the Ottoman Empire is down here, but this is the Austria-Hungaries are part of the alliance with Germany there. All right, Spain, neutral. Switzerland, always neutral. And then Norway and Sweden there, Denmark. All right, as you can see, the number of soldiers and millions that are sent into Europe in 1914, Russia and France have a high number. Great Britain contributes some of the fewest, but have some of the highest costs, as you'll see, other than Russia. Austria-Hungary and Germany also contribute a significant amount of troops. All right. So how does this all break down? Like, what starts this all? There's a conflict going on in Austria-Hungary and Serbia, and that widens to the whole world. All right. So one political assassination starts with 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary visits Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. This angers a lot of the Serbian nationalists. Again, these Serbians, they want freedom. They want to not be under the yoke of Austria-Hungary and Franz Ferdinand. And so they want to do something to get their freedom. And one of the things that they think about doing is assassinating the leader of that country. And so this terrorist group known as the Black Hand, assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife on this carriage ride. Giuseppe is the name of the individual who pulls the trigger, Garibaldi, and he is the one responsible for that murder. Again, another map of the Central Powers and the Allied powers here to give you guys kind of a picture of how this is all playing out. Alright, so how could one assassination lead to such a widespread conflict that just encompasses the whole world? Number one, the blame is shared, so it's not just one country's fault. And number two, it just became too big to stop. Like the wheels just were already set in place. Countries were already vying to support other countries before this stuff happened. So as soon as the assassination did happen, it was just already well on its way. So the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand took place in where? And then what do most historians believe about World War I? The answer is there. The assassination took place in Bosnia, and then all parties are to blame for the war. All right. So why did a stalemate happen in the Western Front, and how did technology change from earlier? All right, we're gonna really fly through this, so just hold on here. All right, Germany. Their original plan is to take France out of the war as fast as possible because they don't want to fight a two-front war. They sweep through Belgium toward Paris very quickly. Russia mobilizes more quickly than it's expected, and Germany has to send troops over to the Russian side of things. So they shift some of their troops to the Russian border, which weakens them in the west. The British and the French defeat the Germans at the Battle of the Marne. That is in Belgium, and that pushed the Germans on the back and destroyed Germany's hopes for a quick win on the Western Front. This results in a stalemate, and we'll get to why that stalemate happens. All right, this line here represents the line of the Central Powers in 1918 after they make their initial assault. You can see they don't get very far. In Russia, they gain a lot more territory because Russia is a little bit slower to mobilize than in the West, but ultimately Russia has a lot of bodies, and they're able to throw them into combat very quickly. All right. Some of the key battle sites, Tannenberg in the east, this is the turning point which ends the German fight against the Russians, and then the Russians plow through after that. And then the Battle of Ypres and the Battle of Verdun are the two big battles there, in addition to the Battle of Marne on the west side. All right, some of the key military advancements are the airplane, the automatic machine gun, and the submarine. For those of you who have fired a weapon at home, most of you have fired a semi-automatic weapon, which means you point the gun and you pull the trigger, and you just keep pulling the trigger one time. Every trigger pull is one round that is fired. Automatic weapons are when you pull the trigger back and hold it back, and it continuously fires one round after another in quick succession. All right. The other type is a bolt action. That's where you pull the trigger and a round fires, and you take the bolt back, you pull it, which ejects the old round out, the shell, and then you have to push the bolt forward and down to put the new bullet into the chamber, aim, and fire. Right? Pull the bolt back, open it up, old round ejects, pull it forward, and new round comes in. And you keep doing that so you can fire rounds rather quickly, but it's a lot quicker to just pull the trigger like this. Bing, 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 bing. It's even a lot quicker to just hold the trigger down and to fire in rapid succession. And we'll just pause there for a second. Some of the other weapons involved are the submarine, the U-boats that are known. Germany uses the U-boats to sink Allied vessels as they go to support the reinforcements of supplies and troops, and is a huge weapon that's also used in World War II and so in effect today. But the biggest weapon is these machine guns, right? Being able to just hold down the weapon or the trigger and to fire, you can kill large swaths of enemy combatants. Okay? Airplane does not come into a large effect in World War I. It does in World War II. For the most part, airplanes are used for reconnaissance or trying to see enemy troops and their locations and movements. But they are used in some dogfights or aerial combat. Not as much as you would think, though. It's quite limited. Alright. So in Eastern Europe, again, we're talking about that Russia-Germany battle going on over there. In August of 1914, the Russian armies pushed into Eastern Germany, so they're kind of fighting back into Germany there. After Russia was defeated in the Battle of Tannenberg, armies in the east fought on Russian soil. So, all right. In Southern Europe in 1915, Bulgaria joined the Central Powers and helped crush Serbia. So they get kind of brutalized for their assassination of the Archduke. Outside of Europe, Japanese involved in allying with Britain and really enforcing some of British laws in China. The Ottoman Empire joins the Central Powers in 1914, and the Arab nationalists revolted against the Ottoman rule. So the Ottomans are fighting not only on the eastern or in the World War I in the West, but also to maintain control of their own empire. And in the colonies, the German colonies in Africa and Asia are getting overrun by the Allies there, and the great powers turn to their own colonies for troops, laborers, and supplies. So what that means is the British were relying on some of their own British colonies, like the Indians, to fight in World War I, and in a large amount they did. Okay, so as you can see, that gives you a picture that the whole world, everywhere, is getting involved in this conflict. That's what I want you guys to take away from that. All right, so how does World War I become a total war? What effects does this continued war have on morale? That this war just keeps dragging on and on and on? And what were the causes and results of the American entry into the war? Alright, so for the first time in world history, we engage in what's called total war. Total war is this idea of channeling a nation's entire resources into into the war effort, which means everyone has a job to do and everyone's involved. You have not a single person on the sidelines here. Your entire country is dedicated to one thing and one thing only, and that's winning the war. It also means you are going to be inflicting as much casualty upon the enemy as you possibly can, which includes civilian casualties, because the civilian themselves are the ones who are involved in the war. It's not always the bullet that's responsible for the death. It's sometimes the factory or the person in the factory who's making the bullet. Since this concept, the Geneva Convention, which I'm a part of, there's a lot of rules to warfare now, such as you can't harm civilians, even if they're the ones involved in making weapons. There's very limited restrictions there. So that has something that has changed. But this comes into play then. The economic impact, you have conscription or the draft coming into play, where countries are largely sending their males aged 18 to 30 into combat, and upwards of 38, or in Germany's cases, at the end, like every male who can hold a weapon. And so they set up systems of recruitment and transport to supply all of their troops. Taxes go up substantially to pay for all these things, and propaganda. Both sides are making the other side look evil to promote their side to be victorious. The role that women play in World War I is massive. All these men leave their factories, leave their jobs to go fight in the war, which means these large amounts of women enter the workforce to make the tools necessary to fight in these conflicts. So they take over a lot of jobs and keep the nations going. They work in war industries, manufacturing, weapons and supplies. They grow food. Right? And some of them even join branches of the armed services. And this is kind of where they're working largely as nurses on the front lines. Alright, so when the war starts in 1914, Germany thinks they're going to win in like a matter of weeks. They think they're going to roll through France, get France to sign a treaty, and France will concede a bunch of land over to Germany. They think they'll roll through Russia and gain a bunch of land there, and they'll sign a treaty, and this war will be wrapped up in a matter of weeks, because that's basically the kind of how things have played out for a long period of time in European history, and so they thought this will be no different. Well, 1917 rolls around. It's been 3 years of absolute bloodshed and terror, and the war hasn't ended. And so both sides, their morale is just absolutely devastated. So taking a look, morale is collapsing. Troops are mutinying and or are being deserted, which means they're just running away, MIA, missing in action. There's long-term casualty lists and food shortages, so people at home aren't very happy because their loved ones are dying, because their standard of living at home is very low, because every resource that they have in their home is being sent out to the war effort to win. And so there's a larger and larger promotion for peace. All right. In Russia, they have a full-scale revolution and just abandon their post to have a revolution in Russia, the 1917 Russian Revolution. German submarines are sinking tons in passenger equipment, and what happens is on May 1915, a German submarine torpedoes the Lusitania, which is a sister ship of the Titanic, and it kills 1,200 passengers, including 120 Americans. It's very widely known today that that ship was also carrying weapons and armaments to aid in the war effort. So those are several reasons why America gets involved. The other events that are catapulting America into the war is not only this tie to Britain and France's style of democracy, which America shares, but also because the Germans sent a telegram to the Mexican government telling them to basically, if they support an invasion of America, that Germany is going to give back a bunch of land to the Mexican government that is in America, like Texas and New Mexico and Arizona. And so the Americans intercept this telegram from the foreign minister, Arthur Zimmerman. It's known as the Zimmerman telegram, and that angers a lot of Americans. So the sinking of Lusitania and Americans being killed plus the supporting of the government structure, then the Zimmermann telegram, boom, America gets involved in World War I, and then it's really over for Germany after that. So we enter the war in 1917. General Pershing for the United States has his own separate force that he delegates to fight in the conflict. By 1918, 2 million American soldiers have joined the Allies in the Western Front. The Germans launch a huge offense, pushing the Allies back, similar to World War II in the Battle of the Bulge. It does not work. The Allies launch a counteroffensive, driving the Germans back across France and into Germany. And then we have the Armistice Agreement in November 11th, 1918, in which the war ends. All right. In fact, it ends at 11 o'clock on November 11th. So there's that. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson issues the 14 points, which is his idea for resolving World War I and all future wars to go with that. So he calls for freedom of the seas, that's still in act today, free trade, large-scale reduction of arms, an end to secret treaties, which is a big thing that led to this here, self-determination, or the right of the people to choose their own form of government, specifically for Eastern Europe there, and the creation of a general association of nations to keep the peace. So that's called the League of Nations, which is what today we have known as the United Nations. Now, oddly enough, this League of Nations, everyone else in the world is like basically on board with creating it, where we like get together as a whole world with different representatives and kind of figure out our differences so we wouldn't have war. Except for the United States, Senate and House of Representatives didn't vote for it, and so we weren't even a part of the own thing that our president pitched to the world. And it fell apart, and then eventually we had it reconvene, and it's now known as the United Nations, which we have into effect. So which of the following was true of women during the war? And Wilson's 14 points called for self-determination for what? All right? Women played a critical role in the war effort, all right? And the self-determination was in Eastern Europe, all right? All right, so over 8.5 million people died in the conflict, which is twice that number had been wounded, so over 16 or 17 million people wounded. Famine was a huge issue in a lot of areas. And then specifically on the Eastern Front, homes, farms, factories, churches are absolute rubble. The country, or the whole continent of Europe, is in shambles. People everywhere are absolutely disillusioned and shaken. The government in Russia has completely collapsed and reformed, as in Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. So as you can see, there are significant changes that have happened here. The Allies, in terms of the French, they lose over 1.5 million soldiers. The British lose close to 1 million. Russia, 1,700 million. And in the United States, we lose 50,000 soldiers in the actual conflict. So we had over 2 million soldiers there. We lost just around 50,000. Right? Germany walks away pretty heavily handed with losing 1,800,000 soldiers. Right? To give you guys a picture, there were 53 million lives lost in World War II. So a much larger scale conflict World War II is compared to World War I. And World War I was thought to be, there's no way there'll ever be a conflict as large and massive as this again, which is why they called it the Great War to begin with. The Treaty of Versailles is officially what ends the war on November 11th at 11 o'clock. Germany assumes full blame for causing the war, and they have huge reparations upon them, which means payments. They have to pay the Allies for having started this war. It's a very aggressive treaty that really hardcore blames Germany and cripples the German economy for a long time. And most historians are accurate in saying that if the Versailles Treaty wasn't as bad, Hitler never would have come to power and World War II might not have happened. But because the Versailles Treaty was so aggressive and kept Germany kind of down from advancing and getting back to itself, it led to a very radical government to help push back against the Treaty of Versailles and force led to Germany, or led to Hitler rising back to power. Alright, so that's kind of where I want to end there. I promised you guys a short lecture. That was a very quick run through of World War I. The Crash Course History video is also going to be a quick run through of World War I. We'll get into more depth in this next week. as well as kind of working through more of our review guide next week as well, so that we're prepared for the final. All in all, I think that one of the biggest things that to take away is the amount of bloodshed because of the technology led to trench warfare. Trench warfare conditions are extremely brutal. It wasn't something we covered in our PowerPoints, but you dig in a hole and you're living in that hole, that trench with everybody else, with water up to your ankles and getting trench foot. There's a lot of nasty pictures I didn't show you guys of trench foot and massive rats and some pretty nasty situations that come out of this warfare. But yeah, that moment, if you've ever seen the movie 1917, which just came out this year about World War I mean, you don't want to go into no man's land between the two sides that are just trenched out, right? You're staring across an open field of landmines and barbed wire, and the whole area is zeroed in with artillery from the enemy. So the moment you go over the top and go into that, you're trying to dodge mines, you're trying to dodge bodies, you're trying to dodge barbed wire. They have machine gun fire that can take you out from 2 football fields away at least. Artillery that's raining down on you. No man's land was not a place you wanted to go. And the term going over the top, when you get out of your trench and run across that field with the enemy, not something anyone on either side wanted to do, because it meant that a lot of people were going to die. And that's exactly what happened at the Battle of the Marne for the British, and did not go well. So all in all, a very, very disastrous conflict that historians largely say could have been prevented. Whereas World War II could have been prevented as well if the Treaty of Versailles wasn't so brutal, but at the same time was an unavoidable war that really needed to be fought in a lot of cases there. Okay, hopefully you enjoyed the lecture. Again, remember to write some of getting very close to finishing your essay, having paragraphs 1 through 5 for sure written. And if you haven't started anything at all, you need to really get busy on that. So email me if you guys have any questions. All right, guys, talk to you guys next week.